Laura and Jason Miller seemed like any ordinary suburban parents, but when they vanished with their 3 young children, the quiet town was thrown into chaos. What drove them to flee the police, and how did they manage to stay one step ahead for weeks? Their desperate flight would shock the community, leaving authorities racing against time to unravel the mystery before it was too late. Laura and Jason Miller's house on Willow Street looked like any other suburban home. The freshly painted white siding gleamed in the morning sun, and the small garden in front was filled with blooming flowers. Passersby would often smile at the sight of Laura pushing baby Sophie in her stroller while Jason helped Liam and Emma ride their bikes along the sidewalk. To the outside world, they were a happy, ordinary family. But beneath the calm surface, tension and fear had been quietly building for months. It started with subtle changes. Laura began locking doors earlier than usual, even during the day, and Jason was often seen pacing the yard late at night, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone. Neighbors noticed the children missing school occasionally, and 1 or 2 whispered about seeing strangers coming and going from the house at odd hours. These incidents were minor on their own, but when combined, they painted a troubling picture. Police had received small tips about the family, nothing alarming at first, and none of the reports led to action. Behind closed doors, Laura and Jason were planning something drastic. They spent hours each night studying maps, tracking highway routes, and researching areas far from the city. Every detail was meticulously calculated: gas stations where they could pay in cash, motels where no questions would be asked, and times when traffic would be light. The children, blissfully unaware, continued their routines: Emma coloring at the kitchen table, Liam building towers with blocks, Sophie babbling in her crib. Life seemed normal, but the parents were plotting a disappearance that would shock the entire community. On a seemingly ordinary morning, the plan was set into motion. The house was quiet, the children asleep, and Laura and Jason moved with precision. By the time neighbors began to notice the absence of lights and the stillness of the yard, it was already too late. The beds were neatly made, breakfast dishes left half-finished on the table, and the garage was empty. The family had vanished without a trace. When the first concerned neighbor called the police, the situation quickly escalated. Patrol cars lined the streets, officers questioned residents, and social media began buzzing with speculation. The disappearance was no longer a private matter, it became a city-wide mystery. Families compared notes, neighbors scanned streets for any sign of movement, and the local news station broadcast the alert repeatedly. The Millers' quiet home had transformed into a focal point of tension, fear, and unanswered questions. By evening, investigators were piecing together the initial clues. Small signs suggested this was no ordinary missing persons case. It was clear that Laura and Jason had carefully orchestrated the entire escape, taking their children along in a plan that left everyone guessing what their next move would be. The ordinary suburban street had become the starting point of a high-stakes chase that would grip the city in suspense for weeks to come. The Miller family's disappearance quickly turned into a tense manhunt. Police soon discovered that Laura and Jason had not left town by conventional means. Surveillance footage from a nearby parking lot revealed them stealing a mid-sized SUV, securing their 3 children in the back seats, and driving off with deliberate precision. The parents had clearly planned every step of the escape, anticipating checkpoints, patrol routes, and the watchful eyes of the public. It was no random act of panic, it was a carefully orchestrated flight. Investigators traced the family's movements through a patchwork of camera footage, toll booth records, and credit card transactions. Every sighting offered a brief glimmer of hope that the Millers could be intercepted, only to have them vanish again without a trace. First, they appeared fueling up at a small station near the city outskirts, then briefly checked into a motel under a false name. By the next day, they had moved hundreds of miles, blending into small towns where residents barely noticed the strangers among them. The sheer distance and unpredictability of their path frustrated law enforcement at every turn. Meanwhile, the story captivated the public. Social media was flooded with speculation. Theories about kidnappings, secret lives, and hidden enemies ran rampant. News channels aired rolling coverage, showing photos of the children and the stolen vehicle, urging anyone who had seen them to report information. Amateur sleuths scoured online databases, analyzing timestamps and tracking gas station receipts. Despite the frenzy, Laura and Jason remained a step ahead, carefully erasing digital footprints and avoiding areas with heavy surveillance. Inside the SUV, the children were surprisingly calm, unaware of the growing tension surrounding their family. Laura and Jason maintained strict routines during the escape, stopping only when necessary, keeping supplies hidden, and using cash for every transaction. The parents seemed determined to maintain a sense of normalcy for their children, even in the chaos of running from the law. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered troubling patterns. The Millers had spent months preparing for this moment: false identification documents, prepaid cards, and meticulous planning of their escape routes. Every clue indicated that the family was not merely fleeing spontaneously. They were executing a plan they had perfected in secret. Detectives began to realize the scale of what they were facing: a family on the run with the knowledge, resources, and foresight to evade capture for an indefinite period. The city held its breath as days passed with no resolution. Each sighting of the family sparked adrenaline and hope, only for it to fade when the trail went cold. It became clear that Laura and Jason were not just running, they were disappearing in plain sight, leaving police, neighbors, and the media in a relentless chase across state lines. The story had escalated from a missing family to a suspenseful pursuit that gripped the entire community, with the fate of 3 innocent children hanging in the balance. The weeks of relentless searching brought the police to a breakthrough, though not the one they expected. An anonymous tip led them to a small, secluded cabin deep in the mountains, far from the city. Officers approached with caution, finding signs of recent activity: children's shoes scattered near the entrance, a small toy car half buried in the dirt, and traces of meals left behind. Yet, despite the evidence, the Millers were gone. The cabin felt like a ghostly snapshot of life, paused mid-motion, as if the family had vanished into thin air. Investigators realized that Laura and Jason were not only running, they were masters of evasion. Every time the authorities closed in, the family anticipated their moves, relocating before being discovered. The police pieced together a pattern. The Millers were moving constantly, avoiding towns where they might be recognized, using rural backroads, and paying cash for every necessity. Digital footprints were scarce, phone signals were deliberately weak, and credit cards were rarely used. The family's ingenuity made the manhunt feel like chasing shadows. As the search continued, officers uncovered an unsettling layer of deception. Laura and Jason had been living under false identities, registering at motels and rental properties with fabricated information. They had carefully constructed new lives wherever they went, and yet, their focus remained on keeping their children safe. Emma, Liam, and Sophie remained largely unaware of the danger surrounding them, laughing and playing as the world searched desperately for them. The parents maintained a delicate balance, protecting their children while continuously eluding law enforcement. Hints of a larger plan began to emerge. Investigators found receipts and small notes that suggested the Millers were preparing for long-term movement, not a brief escape. They had mapped out routes, identified safe stops, and even studied local terrain to ensure they could vanish when necessary. Each clue painted a picture of a family who had thought through every detail, turning ordinary towns and forests into a carefully orchestrated labyrinth designed to hide them. The tension escalated when authorities realized just how close they had been to catching them multiple times. A motel clerk recalled seeing the family but didn't recognize them immediately. A hiker in the mountains had spotted figures moving through the woods but assumed they were tourists. Every near miss underscored the Millers' careful planning and the precarious balance of their escape. The search was no longer just about tracking a missing family, it had transformed into a psychological puzzle. Laura and Jason were not simply fleeing from the law. They were creating a narrative in which every step was calculated, every movement concealed, and every encounter minimized. The investigation had become a high-stakes game of strategy, with 3 innocent children unknowingly caught at the center. Each passing day increased the urgency, leaving authorities and the public on edge, wondering if the Millers would be found or if they would vanish completely. The search for the Millers had stretched into weeks, and frustration among investigators was reaching a breaking point. Every lead seemed to fizzle, every sighting turned out to be a false alarm, and the children's welfare hung like a shadow over every decision. Then, a startling breakthrough arrived: small hidden clues that the family had left behind. At first, they were almost imperceptible: tiny notes tucked inside grocery bags, GPS coordinates hidden in receipts, and coded messages embedded in routine purchases. It became clear that Laura and Jason were leaving a trail, but only for those persistent enough to decode it. The investigation shifted from a broad manhunt to a meticulous decoding effort. Analysts pored over every scrap of evidence, comparing notes, retracing the family's past movements, and plotting coordinates on detailed maps. Patterns began to emerge, pointing toward a remote lake region several hundred miles from the city. The area was popular with campers and tourists, making it the perfect place to hide in plain sight. Laura and Jason had chosen it wisely, a place with natural cover, plenty of supplies nearby, and enough anonymity to blend seamlessly with other visitors. Authorities mobilized rapidly, using drones to scan the dense forests, search dogs to track scents, and satellite imagery to cover wide expanses of terrain. Every angle was combed meticulously, with officers hoping to catch even a fleeting glimpse of the family. Days passed with little to no sign, and tension mounted as the search teams realized the Millers were likely aware of the pursuit, carefully adjusting their hiding spots to stay ahead. Finally, after an exhaustive search, a breakthrough occurred. A drone spotted a faint movement near a boathouse tucked along the lake's edge. Police approached cautiously, hearts racing, and found the Millers thin, tired, and wary, but physically unharmed. The parents seemed prepared for confrontation, yet surrendered quietly when the authorities reached them. Emma clung to Laura, Liam hid behind Jason, and Sophie slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware of the chaos surrounding them. The capture brought immediate relief, but it also raised questions that would linger. How had the Millers managed to stay ahead for so long? What had driven them to take such extreme measures? Evidence recovered at the boathouse revealed a combination of financial troubles, fear of legal consequences, and an obsessive need to protect their children from perceived threats. Even after their capture, the story felt incomplete. Laura and Jason's meticulous planning and the family's months-long disappearance had left an indelible mark on investigators, the public, and the children themselves. The Millers' capture closed one chapter of the saga but opened another, one filled with reflection, recovery, and the search for answers. The story of their flight would be recounted for years, a chilling reminder of how ordinary people can become desperate enough to vanish entirely, leaving the world searching for them while the shadows of their actions lingered. The aftermath of the Millers' capture was both a relief and a bewildering mystery. The city breathed easier knowing the children were safe, but questions about why Laura and Jason had fled lingered in every conversation. Authorities carefully separated the family for initial questioning and medical evaluation. The children, though unharmed physically, displayed subtle signs of stress: Emma's quiet withdrawal, Liam's sudden clinginess, and Sophie's irregular sleep patterns. Specialists worked to help them adjust, but the emotional toll of weeks on the run would not vanish overnight. Investigators combed through the boathouse and recovered an array of documents, receipts, and hidden journals. The evidence suggested that the Millers' flight had been triggered by mounting financial pressures, a sense of impending legal trouble, and paranoia about authorities. There were no indications of malicious intent beyond the desire to protect their children, yet their actions had endangered them nonetheless. Police also discovered that Laura and Jason had meticulously tracked their own movements, leaving behind coded messages and contingency plans in case the search intensified. Each page revealed a family caught between fear and calculated desperation. The public remained captivated. News outlets recounted the story repeatedly, dissecting the parents' motives and the children's experiences. Some commentators suggested that the Millers had exploited loopholes and gaps in the system, highlighting how ordinary citizens could evade detection when careful and determined. Others focused on the human element: the parents' love for their children, twisted into extreme measures that endangered them more than they protected. The story sparked debates in communities nationwide about parental responsibility, fear, and the lengths people might go to when feeling trapped. As the Millers faced legal proceedings, psychologists and social workers provided insight into the family dynamic. Laura and Jason had meticulously constructed a life under the radar, but it was one built on secrecy and anxiety. Their devotion to their children was undeniable, yet it had manifested in a way that disrupted the lives of everyone around them. The case became a cautionary tale for law enforcement and social services, emphasizing the importance of early intervention, vigilance, and understanding signs of extreme stress in families. Even after the immediate crisis ended, the story retained its haunting quality. People in the city whispered about the family that had vanished without a trace, about the children who had lived weeks in uncertainty, and about the parents whose desperation had turned ordinary suburban life into a suspenseful flight across state lines. The Millers' story remained a vivid reminder of how quickly life could unravel, how ordinary people could harbor extraordinary secrets, and how the consequences of fear and planning could ripple far beyond a single family. The city, forever changed by the saga, carried the memory of the Millers' flight as a chilling testament to human determination, desperation, and the fragility of everyday life.